I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
Donc ce que vous êtes en train de subir en France, en Europe, qui fait tellement peur, ça devrait être pour nous la plus belle nouvelle de notre histoire juive. Enfin, on commence à s'y approcher. Enfin, on commence à réaliser ce que les sages nous avaient prescrit avant. Ce que je vous ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est marqué dans Sanhedrin. Le Mashiach viendra que quand Édom, l'Europe, la chrétienté sera totalement tombée. Donc je vous pose la question, c'est une bonne nouvelle que l'islam envahisse l'Europe? C'est une excellente nouvelle, ça annonce l'envie de Mashiach.
Vous allez le payer très cher, les Européens. Mais à un point, vous n'avez même pas notion de quoi on parle. Et vous n'aurez pas au fuir. Parce que tout le mal que vous avez fait à Israël, vous le paierez au centuple. Quand l'Italie disparaîtra, quand Édom, c'est pour ça que le QG de la chrétienté qui vient de Esav se trouve là-bas, quand cet endroit-là disparaîtra, et c'est ce que veut faire l'islam, il s'occupe. L'islam, c'est le balai d'Israël, sachez-le. C'est-à-dire que je vous au lieu qu'on fasse tout le travail, et on voit Ishmaël pour régler le problème.
Amendment 59, that there's a mitzvah and a command to wipe out from among all the descendants of Esav, descendants of Amalek, male and female, young and old. Therefore, God tells us we should erase their memory and we should eradicate them from the face of the earth. So when a Jew enters into Eretz, into the land of Israel, what should he do? The first thing, appoint a king. Step 2, destroy Amalek. Who is Amalek? Amalek comes from Esav. Esav was a brother to Jacob.
Esav, who in modern day terms is really basically, certainly one of them is America. Esav became Edom, which is a nation. Edom became Rome. Instead of it being Rome, it became Christianity. Christianity, of course, ultimately became Western civilization. So Esav today is really Western civilization.
The new Rome, the United States. The new Rome.
Esav is Europe, the United States.
The throne of God is incomplete until we destroy Amalek.
Any nation that has that religion can be considered Esav.
The audacity, the chutzpah, to destroy Amalek and to cut off the offsprings of the nation of Amalek.
Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. And I'm a witch!
C'est un honneur pour moi de porter la flamme olympique de Paris 2024. C'est un moment unique, incroyable.
What would be the most Jewish thing for the last Jew to do? The most appropriate, fitting thing?
One said that the last thing that a Jew should do when he or she leaves Europe is spit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. The title of our episode today is Anti-Christendom, a Spiritual and Cultural Genocide. And before I introduce our guests for today, I would like to remind people, especially new people that are with us, the culmination of our work here on Dr. Deep State is the book In Pursuit of the Metaverse that will be available in a link in the description section. The subtitle is Millennial Dreams, Political Religion, and Techno-Utopia. So just letting you know, a little heads up. And I will introduce our great friend, David, and I'll give you a brief summary from the last time he was here. He was an extremely popular guest with many of our followers. David is from Long Island, New York, and he's a cradle Catholic. He now teaches at university in Lyons, France, and he attends a traditional mass over there. And he is well positioned to not only tell us about what you can actually experientially see in terms of the destruction of Christendom, but for all of us, we can start to kind of see how what's going on in Europe is going on in America and start kind of connecting some dots that there's an agenda at play. And we can maybe see the movement of this agenda, and we can start to think about how we should identify, discern, and in many cases, detach ourselves from probably the more pernicious and malignant sort of mind demons that are attached to it. But in addition, we want to also think about healthy things we can do in terms of a real spiritual and ontological opposition to this war going on upon reality our day. And the war on reality is precisely what In Pursuit of the Metaverse is about. So with no further ado, David, how are you doing today way over there in France?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much again to you, Dr. Haugen, and to Will for having me on again. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be back. There's a lot going on, and as you were indicating, there's a lot that we can talk about. I basically am here to give you an update or a report on the ground from the epicenter of Christendom, which of course is Europe, and I have a lot to share with you. I'd like to talk about what's going on here in Europe. Also, particularly in France. France has that nickname, the eldest daughter of the church, and has had so much influence on the Catholic world, on the Catholic faith, and for that reason is also a target and is a sort of a privileged target for destruction. And I'd like to talk about a number of things that happen, sort of random events that, I mean, some events are random, some are not so random, but just to sort of summarize what's going on here. From where I am here in France, I follow what's going on in the United States to a considerable degree. I know what's going on in the Anglosphere, and I think that most of your audience is either in the U.S. or more in a larger sense in the Anglosphere. But there's a lot going on here on the continent of Europe. My focus is on France, but there are things going on in Germany, things going on in England as well that need to be mentioned, even though that's part of the Anglosphere, but it's also part of Europe to a certain extent. So yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about today.
Excellent. And before we continue, I do just want to remind people that my collaborator is Will Tucker with this book. He did a segment that we dropped yesterday from the Tim Kelly show with him and Vende Radio. If you haven't caught that yet, good stuff, good stuff. And he tied in that talk so many of the great footnotes that are inside of In Pursuit of the Metaverse. So David, where would you like to begin today?
Well, I think I would start by going back to the introduction to today's show, because there are some very important things that were mentioned, not specifically in any particular order, but what we need to recognize is that there is a war taking place, and that war is a war against Christ. It is a war against a society that is based on Christian principles, a war against the church. And we have to know who is waging that war and how that war is being waged. And I think, again, going back to some of the clips in the intro, that will help us to understand that. How far back can we go? I mean, we can go back very, very far, all the way to the Garden of Eden, in a sense. But what we have to think about is to mention what the rabbis were mentioning in the videos that we saw in the beginning, with the mention of Edom, Esau, Ishmael, and the fact that Edom, for those who follow the Kabbalah and the Talmud, Edom is the enemy. And Edom is very clearly identified as Rome, Christianity, Western civilization. And I think that the starting point is to understand the enmity that those who follow the Kabbalah and those who follow the Talmud have against Edom, or in other words, Europe and Western civilization. According to them, Edom needs to be destroyed, wiped out, before the Messiah, their Messiah, can come back. So this is part of the plan. This is part of the program. And not only is it a plan or a program, it is something that they ardently desire, and that they, whenever and however and wherever possible, they will facilitate that. And so what we are seeing now in Europe is the carrying out of this plan. So I wanted to look initially at the question of why this is taking place, but also looking at how this is taking place. And there are two ideas basically that I would like to develop. One is, and I know that it's a loaded word, but I do think that it's real, and that word is genocide. When you live here in Europe, and I've been living here in France for 30 years, you see things happening, and we are witnessing a complete and total transformation of society. And we realize that France is dying, that France is being conquered, France is being taken over, and our Christian civilization is disappearing right in front of our eyes in real time. And so I don't have a problem saying that what is taking place here now in France in particular, and in Europe in general, is a genocide. I just want to read quickly a definition of genocide. I was recently reading an article by a French public figure, a journalist, a writer named Bernard Antony, and he's a bit elderly now, but back in 1980 he wrote an article which became quite famous, and it was called, I'll just say it in French, Le Génocide Français, or in English called The French Genocide. And it appeared in 1980 in a magazine called Itinéraire, which the translation of which is Itineraries. And he said that France is experiencing a genocide. And let me just read his very brief definition of what he means by genocide. Any methodically coordinated plan to destroy the life and culture of a people and threaten their biological and spiritual unity. And I think, again, because when we hear the word genocide, we think of very dramatic scenes. We might think of concentration camps, again, very, very sort of over the top or dramatic ideas and scenes. But according to this definition, it's basically the extinguishing of a culture, an extinguishing of a people, destroying the life and the culture of a people and threaten their biological and spiritual unity. From that definition, Bernard Antony went on to mention three genocides that are taking place in France. One is a spiritual genocide. In other words, moving people away from God, depriving people of a spiritual life, cutting them off from their spiritual roots. That is the spiritual genocide. We have a cultural, intellectual, and moral genocide, and that is on full display. Let me jump back to the introduction that we saw a few minutes ago. There were some scenes of music being played and singing singing and music. And for anyone who might not know, but perhaps people in the States might not be aware of that, those scenes were taken from a kind of music competition, which here in Europe is called the Eurovision Song Contest, and it takes place every year. It is very big. It's certainly as big as the Grammys. I would sort of say sometimes that it might be the Grammys and the Super Bowl mixed together. It's quite big, and it's a platform for every country to send a representative to sing a song, and then there's a competition. People can call up and they vote and so on and so forth. For the past few years, historically has been very family friendly, very nice. Way back in the early 70s, the group ABBA, they got their start by appearing in this show as Sweden's representative with their famous song Waterloo. Don't know if any boomers out there might be familiar with this, but anyway, in any case, the music components of the introduction was this year's Eurovision Song Contest, and the person who was saying, "I am queer, I am a witch," that duo was Catholic Ireland's entry into this contest. It's almost beyond belief. And then, of course, the segment of music that was played was that group or that duo performing, and it was out and out satanic. The satanic references were clearly on display, and basically all of the components of that program were similar. So in any case, we have the cultural, intellectual, and moral genocide, and I'll try to talk a bit about that today. And then thirdly, there is what we would call the physical genocide. And the physical genocide sort of has two branches. One would be the reduction in the birth rate of the native European population, the promotion of abortion, and I have a few statistics concerning those things. And then the other thing, of course, is what is known as the Great Replacement, and that is massive immigration coming from outside of Europe, which is not only tolerated, but actively promoted by our governments here in Europe. And this is known as the Great Replacement. The French term we call it le grand remplacement. It is increasingly known and not accepted. I mean, it is part of everyday life here in Europe, and it's being spoken about more and more openly that the European population is actually being replaced right in front of our eyes. And it is something that has greatly accelerated in the last few years. I would say it has greatly accelerated since the COVID episode. So again, with those three genocides taking place, we are seeing really the eclipse and possibly the end of European civilization.
Yeah. Well, we'll dig into that a little bit. Why, the direction of it, and some of that was hinted on in the introduction. I think that a lot of people, I've been showing those clips. You can go back 7 years and the Luboviches and so forth. And I notice they fall on deaf ears. It's too much information for most people. But it's kind of getting into even the Catholic mainstream. LifeSite News actually started talking about Noahide laws and the Hasids and the Luboviches, and how there's even posters now of the Rebbe going in France, which means, hey, get ready, the Noahide laws are coming. And so, the question is, what does that mean and how is that working? And I think what we want to touch on a little bit here is how the sort of masters of this show are using both we could say the grand left and the right, Christianity and the Muslim faith, in a dialectic exchange to move us toward the Noahide laws. Now, we can only get on that a little bit, but what I do hope is that there are kind of ears to hear this right now, that sometimes people, unless, as Richard Nixon would say, Americans don't believe something unless they see it on the TV. Nowadays, will probably people give it any heed. So I think since we're kind of a few steps ahead of how this Noahide law is being put into motion, and what the program is, that we can start to think about that. I'm going to just mention a quick idea of soft genocide. When I was a young person touring Europe after my stint in Oxford, that sounds kind of showy, doesn't it? I was with my girlfriend at the time, and she spoke this beautiful French. She was half English, half French. Her mother's from France. And so it was a fun way to see the city with somebody that there's a completely different reaction if you have smart French compared to street French and so forth. Anyway, we were up at the time, this would have been the late 80s. We were in one of the carousels, and I could see, I actually took a photo of all I know is the name is the Basilica that was in the lead shot. And maybe you'll tell us the name in a moment of the Basilica, but I'm sure it has humongous significance outside of Notre Dame, I can only imagine. But yesterday I went to confession, and I went a few towns over into San Juan, and the place is called the Basilica because it's the main meeting place of our diocese. And it is an absolute mid-century monstrosity. And just waiting in this thing for confession was painful. And I remember sometimes you leave confession and you just kind of have a sense of relief. It's just like, it was so big, I couldn't find my car in the parking lot. I didn't mean to go here with the conversation, but that's kind of a type of soft genocide that's been going on in our cityscapes all across the Anglosphere for a long time. And people kind of thought, oh, it's a city planner here, a city planner there, and you kind of left it behind. When all these things from the last 50 years and including, Vatican II and so forth, start to come to a head, and the events going on we're throwing the word genocide around in the Middle East right now, you really have to have a willing blinders on to not want to see this information right now. Yeah. And yeah, when you use the words like the genocide of Christendom, Christian civilization, what to do with that, what to think about it. Part of the idea, just like any growth in our physical, psychological, or spiritual self, does require us to hit a wall, hit a dark spot, and get over it. So just being blinded by this or remaining in some kind of escape mode is not the solution. So we do want to hit some of these dark things head on. Some of the things that the rabbi said, like that it's increasing. People used to write this off that didn't want to deal with the enmity. And by the way, the enmity that Vatican II they avoid what always been recognized as the enmity or the perfidious Jews, and it's just the brotherhood. And as Father Maudsley points out, as I point out, as Will points out, yeah, it's a brotherhood. It's between Cain and Abel, between Esau and Jacob. It's one of enmity. And so until we identify that, we will suffer. When our faith crushes and the religion, this apostasy church begins to seriously change the liturgy, then the full-time demonic forces are going to come, the restraining forces in our world. The more we can identify this force, discern, and detach, it doesn't seem, oh, you don't want to be involved in politics. No, that's part of restraining it. This is throwing our prayers and our consciousness to the saints in this cosmic battle against these forces coming in. But gosh dang, when I saw I guess it's a Bambi gorilla, Bambi thug.
Bambi thug.
I mean, that 3 seconds of her was giving me the creep outs there.
The longer version of that video that appeared, I almost could not get through it. It was difficult. I think I had to say some prayers afterwards because I think it affected my soul, and I can't even imagine people who would voluntarily turn on a program like that and willingly watch such things. Even the winner of this contest was from Switzerland, and a big deal was made because this person claims to be non-binary, and so the media has been going bananas saying that so the first non-binary person has won this contest. I mean, getting back to this notion or idea of the cultural genocide is, we are being forced to swallow this. We are being forced to watch it. We are being forced to accept it. They want us to give our assent. And this is something, and it gets worse and worse and more extreme all the time. And I think, and I don't know whether this is true, but it seems to me that now it is going too far. I mean, I think for decades, people have been said, well, now we're going too far. Now we're going too far. But what we're seeing now in Europe, at least, is I do think it's waking a lot of people up. I would certainly not say it's a majority, but there are more and more people waking up, and they're pushing back and resisting this. Just one final point, sort of in line with what you were saying. You're asking about the basilica, and in the basilica, I think that you're referring to is the Basilica of what we call in French the Sacré-Cœur, or the Sacred Heart Basilica, which is on the top of Montmartre Hill, the hill of Montmartre in Paris. And it is, again, we don't have the time to go into a big description about this basilica, but the one thing I want to mention is, again, in the intro, there was the scene of an interview with the transvestite person, and then there was another scene of a person carrying the Olympic flame, who also says that he is queer. And again, this is forcing the French people, taking something which in a sense you could say is a nice thing, the carrying of the Olympic flame. People get excited about it. They're interested in it. But many of these carriers of the flame around France are actually drag queens and transvestites. And it is a kind of humiliation of the French people, a demoralization of the French people to be obliged to watch such things. It's a weapon. I think that's what I want to say. It's not simply something that you see on the screen. It is not innocent. It is a weapon that is being used to beat us down, to demoralize us, to make us lose our faith and give up hope, I think. But the last thing about the basilica that you mentioned, and this is just absolutely a horrifying thing, which is when the Olympic flame arrives in Paris, there is going to be a parade of drag queens right in front of the Sacred Heart Basilica in Paris. And they are going to be carrying the Olympic flame and doing basically a drag show on the steps in front of the Sacred Heart Basilica in Paris. It is unconscionable. And again, what I said at the beginning, this is war. This is warfare waged against Christian civilization and warfare waged against Christ himself.
Yes, absolutely. Will Tucker, are you there? I saw you
battling a little bit of a cold here, trying to.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you can a little bit.
Stood out to me in the intro was the phrase "erase their memory of Amalek," which suggests it doesn't necessarily need to be a physical genocide, but it's something that has to do more with this sort of menticidal program that we've been talking about, in which the form is removed of its essence. So there can be a form of Christian society, but it just has to be removed of any of its truth claims that prevent this new messianic project from taking place. But also, it's a confusing web of attacks, because it would seem on one end, with the Noahide laws, it's about this kind of ultra orthodox restriction of idolatry and sexual deviance, but at the same time, we're being bombarded with hypersexuality and the queer agenda and witchcraft and the most flagrant forms of idolatry you can imagine. So there's a sort of embodiment of contradiction here that erases our memory even more so, and where we're not able to really sense where the enmity is coming from.
Yes, and there's two things going on here before I hop over to Dave. One is these, in fact, in chapter 10 in this book, I really go through the techniques of the totalitarian of menticide, breaking us down, the humiliation, rituals, and so forth. And I think what people should get out of this when we're talking about Europe, it's like, hey, that's the same thing going on in Austin, in San Francisco, in New York. It's in your face. Think about the introduction of Will and Grace and how, I don't keep track of time, was that 10 years ago? How far we've come from that foot in the door to just beating you over the head. And it feels like, the end of the Roman civilization. The hordes are at the gates. So people are paid to come in here into our country to get massive loads of money. Same thing in Europe. The replacement on top of the sexual degeneration. Of course, the winner of each film or music has to be the craziest thing out there. I would say, just as a bit of hope, Rene Girard would say, nothing's always just one thing. Reality is kind of sliced. So when you get a bit of that, there's going to be resurgence in something else. And that's where our hope in Christ lies, or our hope in reality. So we don't want to get so black-pilled that we, just resign ourselves or just resort to pure escapism, because there will, in any time, and especially the most challenging times, and probably if this is in fact we're on the beginning of a tribulation, there are a lot of promises even within the tribulation that we can look forward to. So David, where would you like to continue now?
Well, getting back to this, one final point I would like to mention, sort of a theme of today's discussion, is I was talking about the why. I also want to talk a little bit about the how, and the how being the genocide, the physical genocide. But also, I want to go back to one of the things that the first rabbi who was speaking in French, mentioned. He used the term l'Islam et le balai d'Israël. In other words, Islam is the broom of Israel. And the rabbi was saying that they, the Jews, need to rejoice. He said, is it a good thing that Islam is taking over in Europe? And he said, of course it's a good thing, because Islam is going to destroy Edom, and then that will permit the return of the Messiah. And he said this famous phrase that Islam is the broom of Israel, meaning Islam is the tool by which Israel's wishes will be carried out, that Christianity will be wiped out, the Edomites, the Europeans, the Romans, Western civilization, whatever you're calling it, will be wiped out. And so in a lot of today's discussion, when we talk about the great replacement, the population replacement, it's the replacement of the European population with the Muslim population. And obviously, the more the Muslim population increases and the native population becomes relatively smaller, this is going to bring about profound changes in society, which by definition are going to move us away from the Christian faith, which was the foundation of Europe. Again, getting back to our introduction, the quote, famous quote from Hilaire Belloc, one of my favorite writers, which is, Europe is the faith and the faith is Europe. And I think it is that identity, it is that sentence, that idea, which those who follow the Talmud and the Kabbalists want to do away with. Getting back to this, one more time, to this term of genocide, I'd like to share a video, if possible, with the audience. another brief discussion by a rabbi who actually uses the term cultural genocide. He talks about the fate that awaits the goyim, and he uses the term cultural genocide. May I present that, or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can. So, hold on.
So bear in mind the immigration throughout the Anglosphere and Western civilization is planned. It's part of an agenda. Here we go.
Okay, so I'll play this now. Everybody listen closely. Wait a minute. Hold on. Excuse me. All right, we'll start from the beginning.
Asking what's going to be with the Goyim when Mashiach comes. Will they be destroyed and annihilated? Someone asked, who cares? Okay. As a nation, they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. Every individual, no survivors. Not only as a nation, they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. As Goyim, they're gone. Their personality, as they exist, bifnei atzmam, as they would exist independently of Klal Yisrael, they don't exist. They're done. In modern terminology, they call it cultural genocide. There's a term for it by the progressives. It's called cultural genocide, and they use the word genocide. So that's the opinion who says that they'll be annihilated. They basically learn there's going to be cultural genocide. That you know what the goyim as they exist as goyim b'fnei atzmam, that's done with. Batul u'mavutul.
So yeah, I think if these clips have been around, there's a handful of people that have been sharing these kind of clips for 5-10 years. Given now what's going on, and we see the attitude and the agenda taking place in the Middle East, I think people are going like, "Whoa, this isn't some off the rails rabbi over here. The agenda is playing out. The commanding heights of the economy, the masters of the monopolies of the world, the dominant oligarchies. This is their agenda. This is real. This is happening," and I think. Here it is, so I think it's so much different. I think when people see this 5 years ago or today, what are your reflections, David?
I'm going to come back to something you said in one of your previous conversations. I don't remember particularly which one it was, but you were talking about the enmity and the fact that the enmity needs to be addressed on theological terms. I think that you were asking before, why is it that people don't see this or can't wrap their minds around it? And I think that people think that the enmity is a racial issue. And people simply don't want to go there. And so they simply black it out or blot it out and say, we're just simply not going to deal with that. But as you pointed out, and this is just something I remember, I think it was a very good point, that the enmity is a theological enmity. And it needs to be addressed theologically. And I think that is something also that Father Maudsley has stressed as well, that it's the rejection of Christ that leads us to this place, and that the enmity is a theological question, and it needs to be addressed theologically. And I think that most people, even Catholics, are not used to addressing things theologically. They simply don't have the tools, or they don't have the mental outlook to be able to do that. I think that they think that we live in a world without enemies, that Christ does not have enemies, that the church does not have enemies. But it does. I mean, this is something which, again, I'll admit, it took me some time to reach this point, to understand that we do have enemies, that Christ has enemies, that the church has enemies, and that there is a war going on. And the war I can understand the war has been going on for 2,000 years, if not longer, since the Garden of Eden. But I do believe that we are in a different phase of the war now. I don't know if it's a final phase, but things have been ramped up, and I think we have to take it to the next level.
Yeah. The final chapter in my book, Seeing Through the Singularity, is called The Egregore of Earthly Jerusalem. So here's the key part of this mind virus with the egregore. People don't know they're infected, so they can't get out. So they're stuck in this paradigm, and the paradigm is they can't see the enmity. They're locked into different levels of progressive ideology or, process theology without kind of realizing that this is natural. This is how things move forward in the modern world. They accept modernism. And they also can't see the apostasy in the church. So they're blind to it. No matter how scholarly or how academic or erudite or pedantic they might sound, they're lost. And so they cannot defend against this theological, metaphysical enemy that's coming to defeat. And just so you know, the theological terms between Jacob and Esau, we're Jacob, that's Christ, that's the seed of the woman, but they invert it because that's what they do. So until you kind of can see that, or it sounds like Kabbalah, and Kabbalah makes people kind of gloss over. But yeah, I think when you see these clips in your face, either you kind of go, wait a minute, there's a problem here. Maybe I have to rethink this, or you just shut out and you do the oh, you're being monocausal. Oh, it's bigger than just that. Oh, it's also, it's also the globalists and the Masons, they can't deal with so this is the most powerful thing you're doing, is just showing people in the face. And then the last thing they'll do is, that's just a crazy rabbi out there, until you see how it comports with the agenda taking place in front of us on college campuses, the double standard, what kind of power in the earth can shut those protests down all throughout Europe, all throughout the United States, can take an attack on the farmers in both countries. Who has the power to do that? But the most interesting part we have to discuss right now is the broom. And this idea has been around. They are going to use, this is the dialectic, East and West, Christians and Muslims, to do this. And I don't want to get into all the technical parts of it, because there's a Masonic piece, the 21st level of the Masons. That's part of the Noahide, the ridding, the eradication, the actual physical genocide. So the technique, ever since the Passion of Christ, is to use somebody else to do your dirty work. So everything continues in these typologies. And I think we can maybe only brush that issue. And I don't know which video you want to address next, but I do know you had a broom one in there, but I'm going to let you just take it away, Dave. Will, do you want to jump in? Any comments before? I saw you.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in there, as well as you're saying, why can't people see this as a theological enmity? It's that within modernism and the post-conciliar dispensation, science, and particularly astrophysics and evolutionary science, has surpassed theology as the queen of the sciences. So whenever you apply race to this equation of science, it immediately calls up eugenics and white supremacy and nationalist totalitarianism, and so that's automatically taboo, and they can't see these things as sort of cultural residues that have persist into the world, because that's the way God designed it. And also wanted to offer up this reading from Safaria.org. It says, according to halakha, a Jew cannot totally destroy the deity of a Gentile. In order to be fully effective, this must be done by the Gentile himself. This is why the Egyptians had to bury their bones. Causing the Egyptians to perform this act of annihilating the remains of their one-time supreme deity was the most effective act of boosting their belief in the one and holy God of the Jews. All of the foregoing is spelled out in the Zohar. So it's not enough to just go in and tear down the edifices of Christendom. We have to be compelled to do it ourselves.
Absolutely. So it requires assent or consent. And essentially, at the end of the day, it's an auto-demolition of Western civilization, and it's an auto-demolition that is also going on in the church. And it helps if you're going to do, when people say, what do you do? The first thing you have to do is identify it, because that's actually part of the agenda. It has to be destroyed from the inside out. And when you think about this theologically, that really makes a sense, because yes, we have enemies. Christ has enemies, but our own sin also plays into this, and our inability to identify the spiritual combat in its fullest against Christ's kingdom and Christ's kingship. David, what do you want to do next?
Yeah, well, just one response to what you've both been saying, and again, certainly there's a place for focusing on Christ's enemies and even, if you want to call it, the Muslim invasion of Europe and so on, and looking at them or these events or these facts as outside forces that are going to harm us. But there's the other angle, which I think is very important, which is that the Europeans themselves have not been saintly throughout history. In a sense, might be, I don't know if it's okay to say this, but God might be killing two birds with one stone. In other words, this might, in fact, I think it probably is a form of punishment for the Europeans, because the Europeans are not innocent. When you look at the Protestant Revolution, when you look at the Renaissance, when you look at the French Revolution and so on, these were, in a sense, native European events. You have had apostasies from the church, from Christianity, a distortion of Christianity, and a lot of these things have originated in Europe. So, in a certain sense, again, I don't want to say something like, the Europeans deserve this or anything like that, but I think that there is something to be said for when a people turn their back on God, when a people abandon their faith and turn away from the church, there are consequences to that. And I think that God will allow certain things to occur that will cause people to return to him. Yes. And this might be one of those things. In fact, I don't think, I doubt to a certain extent. And again, one thing, it's always good to have hope and certainly to have some positive things to say. I cannot say that there is a huge religious revival in Europe taking place now, but there are glimmers of it. You do see more and more people, and some people you would never have thought of returning to the faith, or people not returning, or just people converting in any sense. But you do see it. There are people who are making the connections, who are realizing that, wait a minute, there's something very, very wrong going on here. And going back to the origins, what is in a sense, the big sin of Europe? And I think we could say it's the rending of Christendom, the turning of Europe's back on Christ and his church. Again, not everybody, but in the commanding heights of society, if you look at various countries, various leaders and so on, this has been the case. And I think that God might be allowing these things to occur so that people will see what the consequences, well, again, ideas have consequences, and actions have consequences. And we might be living through something like this now.
Yeah. I mean, God used the Assyrians, he used the Babylonians, he used the Egyptians to do his work. So do you have another clip that you'd like to show?
Yeah, I do. Again, I'll come back to the theme that Europe is being invaded, and the invasion takes place on a daily basis, day after day, week after week, and month after month. And the numbers are staggering. And it's something, I'll just speaking personally, something that I see in my everyday life. The changes are really coming fast and furious now. I have a short clip which shows an arrival of boats on the Spanish coast. It's not long. It just takes, it might be a minute or so. But I'd like to show it to see the sort of how this invasion is taking place on right here in Europe. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share the screen again. And here we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
So this happens every single day. These are boatloads of what are called asylum seekers. arriving on the Spanish coast. And you'll notice that the boats drop off the asylum seekers, and then they turn around and head back to deliver more. And of course, as is often said, these are all men. There are no women, there are no children. So this is an invading army, and it looks something like a ragtag D-Day.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. I mean, for people, are you with us, Will? Okay. Yeah, we see, I can't even watch it. We have trains and trains and trains coming into America. But now whoever's funding these things, they usually just put them, they pay for the direct flights into the cities. They don't even have to put on the show of going through the Texas governor. So it's a worldwide program to overwhelm, broadly speaking, Western civilization, Christendom. And what do you do when half the people in Europe or half the people in North America, Canadians, and like, what, and it's hard to kind of think about, what should whites do and compared to Latinos and Asians? Like, what do you do when you see this? If people don't even, if half your own population is indifferent to it, and I don't see how people could see those kind of things and see the agenda. Now, I think slowly, like in New York City, some people wake up. And I guess the hope is, if in America, if Trump came in, somehow this would be different. Not saying it wouldn't, but I think we realized, like in England, and maybe you have some clips of England, the Tories allowed more people in the last 5 years in than anybody else combined. Well, not combined, but it doesn't matter. People don't want to hear that, but we're out of political solutions. And that's why, when we think of it as ontological warfare, we do have to first and foremost get our heads around the spiritual enemy, and that thinks that we're Amalek. And we need to be destroyed root and branch. And so before we kind of, debate about how Trump is playing 3D chess, we have to really get our spiritual house and our spiritual eyes in order and clearly recognize that, and stop apologizing like it's not them, or it's a combination of this dialectic. It's both the communists and the Zionists are going to bring together, and they want the Christians, or nominal Christians, what's left, to fight it out with Muslims and kill each other, and the remains are going to be there. That's a part of this long-term program that's been there. And certainly that's what Albert Pike is talking about, 150 years ago. What else do you got for us as far as a clip? And Will, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, one of the preconditions of liberalism is that Christ is not sovereign, and once you consent to that level, it's a steady descent in which then there's a certain sovereignty that's handed over to the enemies of Christ, and then so much so that your memory is erased and you can't even acknowledge who your enemies are anymore and who your friends are anymore. So I think,
yeah, because you'll tune into Fox News or whatever your equivalent is over there, and it's so baked into the cake of capitalism or this, and when you critique it, well, are you a communist? Are you this? It's like, no, these are going to be what we see, these invasions in Europe. These are the fruits of liberalism, which is just a fancy way of saying J power over here. I'm sorry, Will, go ahead.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is that, like, Christian charity and loving one's neighbor gets conflated with accepting differences and handing over rights to to foreign interests that then begin to weaponize your liberal society against you, so that you no longer have rights. So it's kind of a if Christ isn't sovereign, then Antichrist is sovereign, and we're conditioned to see it as like sort of a horizontal field in which there's multiple ethnic and religious groups interacting, but really it's that simple.
That's true. Again, there is certainly many parallels between things happening in the States and things happening in Europe. Although the parallels are not, 100%, they don't coincide 100%. But one thing that is very clear here in Europe is that Christian charity itself is being weaponized and used as an excuse to allow this invasion and the destruction of Christianity to take place to such a point where it basically is, you have to, in order for you to be a good Christian, you have to accept the destruction of Christianity.
Yes.
And it's and I have to say, it works. It works with a lot of people. You have the Catholic Church, you have Christians in general, Protestants in Germany. Again, certainly not all. I mean, there are certainly those who resist among both Protestants and Catholics, but you have very large numbers of Catholics and Protestants, depending on the country, who will go along with this idea that unless you are okay with half of the population being not only non-Christian, but being violently and fanatically anti-Christian, somehow you're not being a Christian. And the preference for the other, or the preference for the outsider, trumps everything. And everything must be done to accommodate the outsider, even to the point of making your faith or your religion, the Christian religion, something not only secondary, but tertiary, and making way for the newcomers to come in. And what happens is, of course, they make demands, they establish themselves, and then all of a sudden, you no longer have a Christian society. It is, as the lady in the first scene of the intro said, now you have a multicultural society. But multicultural society becomes the objective, which means you have a non-Christian society where Christ is not king, where we have to defer to other religions, and in particular, it's the Muslim religion.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to play one of those clips from somebody talking about the broom, just so people can actually see this is like actually a part of a conversation?
Well, the where the broom was mentioned was in the one of the intro clips, where it was the French rabbi who said the broom of Israel. I do have another clip that I would like to show of some activism against what is happening in Europe. And I don't know if you're familiar with a young lady whose name is Eva Vlaardingerbroek. It's kind of a little bit of a tongue twister name. She is Dutch, and she has been a quite an activist against the invasion of Europe and the Islamization of Europe. And she is working very, very hard to wake people up. I will add that about a year ago, she entered the Catholic Church. She had a religious conversion and became a Catholic, and is very outspoken in saying that if Europe wants this to stop, we must return to the church. We must return to Christ and to Christ's church, the one that he founded, the church that built Europe and built European civilization. So if I may, I would like to show, it's a pretty, all of my clips are pretty brief. She was speaking in Budapest, Hungary, and Hungary deserves a bit, a mention in this conversation. Again, you'll have to forgive me for not knowing how much you follow things or don't follow things over here. But Hungary is probably the only European country that openly resists what is happening. The leader of Hungary, the prime minister is a gentleman named Viktor Orban, and he has been waging a sort of one-man resistance movement against the European Union and is saying that Hungary is a small country. We're a small people. We want to remain Hungarian. We want to keep our culture. We want to keep our religion, and we are not going to open our borders and let let foreigners come in and take over our country. And so he's being persecuted by the European Union for these positions. But anyway, I'd like to get back to Eva Vlaardingerbroek, who is Dutch. And she's giving it a little brief. This is just part of a brief talk that she gave, and if I may show that now, it's quite interesting. So here we go with Eva.
Almost 60 otter.
Yeah.
Let's take Amsterdam, the capital. Amsterdam currently consists of 56% migrants. The Hague, 58% migrants. Rotterdam, almost 60% migrants. And of course, most of these immigrants come from non-Christian, non-Western, African and Middle Eastern countries. Conclusion, the Dutch population is already outnumbered in the majority of our cities. But let's look onwards. London, 54% migrants. Again, conclusion, native population outnumbered. Brussels, color me shocked, 70% migrants. Conclusion, native population majorly outnumbered. And other Europeans will, of course, follow suit soon if they haven't already. So I'm going to draw the forbidden conclusion here. The Great Replacement theory is no longer a theory, it's reality. And what's interesting about replacement is that the establishment will either deny its existence, or when they admit to it, they say that it's a good thing that the native European population is soon no longer a majority on its own continent. Dutch national disgrace and dubbed climate pope Frans Timmermans already stated in 2015 that diversity is humanity's destiny and that Europe will be diverse. And of course, by now, I think we all know what they mean with the word diversity. It means less white people, less of you. Imagine this in an Asian or an African country. Imagine their leaders rejoicing in the fact that their people will soon no longer be a majority in their own country. Absolutely unthinkable, unimaginable. So what in the world is wrong with our leaders?
Yeah, I think Will might have jumped in here too with this one in case we want to kind of cut this off a little bit preempted. She might be involved with like ARC kind of group or Peterson kind of stuff. So she's pointing out something. She's like a lot of the people with a large platform. She's not going to point out the enmity, and I don't know her entirely. Mm-hmm. But when it comes with words like the establishment or the Anglo, these words just, it's a big cluster F. It gets you down. When you can see the ontological and the metaphysical enmity, at least spiritually, from the inside out, you can try to change your communities. And that's why we need to identify this. And so whenever anybody, they want to get some traction and they put somebody like that, and I don't know all the connections that she has, but that's what I'm looking for. When are we going to get the leaders that can kind of start really identifying this with a typological biblical pattern that's honest and doesn't omit the enmity, but instead obfuscates it and tries to say Catholicism should just join this. And yeah, I know, David, sometimes it's frustrating. I'll be in mass and my priest will say, we have to love these people. And, I don't think they really know where some of the funding comes for some of these tax services, but some people have exposed it. The same people that are supporting the intrusion invasion also support eugenics projects. So under a Catholic label. So there's a lot of confusing things going on. But again, just so we have a sense of being overwhelmed by this, the sense of the ontological, metaphysical significance of understanding that it's Christian faith that's being attacked. It's the Christian civilization, the liturgy, and at the heart of that, the Eucharist. And that's what we have to defend first and foremost in our hearts and soul and get it right. What's being played out right now is something God is allowing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we also always have to remind ourselves that our own personal holiness needs to be front and center before anything else proceeds from this. Will, I think before I do, Dave, Will, did you have something that looked like?
Yeah, I did. Kind of slipped my mind for a second. Let's see if I can regather here. Yeah, I just want to say too, the counter to that, to her argument would be, from the side of a typical leftist, would be, well, the American empire is reaping what it's sown by interfering in foreign government, with foreign nations and resource stripping and weaponizing the World Bank and things like this. You've created these social dislocations, and so now the chickens are coming home to roost. And what's left out there is that, well, America is also the broom of Israel. The American empire is an extension of Jewish power, and it's not like we got together and voted to say, let's send all of our jobs offshore and let's make sure all of our resources are coming from the Middle East and from West Africa. Those decisions were made by these captains of industry and the heights of the economy, the heights of the oligarchy that are, as we see, perfectly aligned with what the rabbis are saying. And so until you can see that hidden hand, we're just chasing our tail, even if we are talking about replacement theory, if we are talking about national borders and pointing out these taboo subjects. If we can't get to what you just said, this ontological, theological enmity, then we're sort of being baited along in the same direction.
One thing that is I've seen in the 30 years I've been living in France is now. And this is it's I have to say, speaking as an American, it saddens me. But getting back to what you just said, Will, is the fact that the United States is now identified with Israel almost as a unit. And you're right, I hadn't heard that before, but in a sense, the United States is the broom of Israel. And again, speaking as an American, among like-minded people, the United States is clearly seen as a bad actor. And it's sort of hard for me to, to come to terms with that. But again, I understand it. I think that the United States has become a kind of zombie state, which doesn't really represent its own interests or the interests of its people. It really, and to see what's been happening with regard to the Gaza conflict, with what's been happening with regard to Ukraine, and even going back further than that, is how much American politics and American politicians are beholden to these outside forces. And there's very little representation or consideration of the American people in the thinking and the actions of the U.S. government. And again, it's hard for me to say that. Getting back to Doug, I think both of us grew up in the same time, in the same sort of frame of mind, and so to see the United States behaving, or I would even say being treated this way, is it's just a hard thing to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, after October 7th, it is very difficult to not see that all of our politicians, left and right, are bought and paid for. They pay oaths to the same power, and they put that power miles ahead of the interests of the American people. If that was difficult for people to get their heads around in the past, it's there for metaphysical reasons. And that's what the whole idea of we've crossed the Rubicon. It's go time and it's judgment time, and you really have to get your mind right. And, I don't know what else to say at this moment. If you can't kind of figure this out, that your government has sold you out, if you still want to believe in a political solution, you go for it. But I think we're being judged by God for sleeping at the wheel. Mm-hmm. And our American foreign policy has been off the rails for a long time. And especially the right wing or the conservatives that saw our foreign policy 9/11, the information's out there. Who did it? Bomb these people for profit. All of the patriot stuff was put back on us to protect us from them, and then they opened the floodgates for those people that they agitated into Europe and beyond, and they're just creating this. There's a boiling cauldron that's waiting to pop. And I know a lot of people are going to think, well, gosh, what do you do about it? And it is in the big picture. There are limits, and we have to accept that. And we have to start working inside out with ourselves, our families, our communities, and really get our scripture right, our liturgies right, and then kind of rethink about some of the attachments of the idols that we have had, and just really purify ourselves, because that's what we're being judged upon right now as a nation. And I think what you said biblically sort of makes sense. And when we even think about the Great Tribulation or the Great Chastisement, it's a chastisement, right? For fleeing, for really being cafeteria Catholics, or pick and choose Protestants, that I like this Jesus, I don't like that Jesus. I like the Jesus of tolerance, but not the one of discernment and judgment. And so they go together. And we do have, at least in Catholicism, we have a magisterium, a historical church to lean on at this time. And that really should give us solace and strength.
Despite the negative things, there have been I think there's been quite a bit of, I'm trying to find my word, not consolidation, but there's been a lot of clarification taking place. Again, Doug, you and I are basically the same age, and so I think we grew up with the same mindset, so to speak. And when I was growing up in New York, I was like, yeah, Israel, it's an ally, it's an allied country, it's a democracy in the Middle East, blah, 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 and everything. It takes time to wean yourself off of, to move away and sort of free yourself from these ideas. And I think that the United States, and again, I as a cradle Catholic, the Catholic Church in the United States got very, very comfortable, with the American way, with the American system, with liberalism, not realizing the danger that liberalism posed, and that it's a kind of seduction. Again, I think that in one of your previous shows, one of you, or maybe one of the guests, made a very good point that when you look at the ideologies that sprang from the French Revolution, the communism and fascism and liberalism, of those three, it was liberalism that was the worst, because it's the most dangerous. It's the most seductive. And I think that the Catholic Church in America, as you said, fell asleep at the wheel, let down its guard, and in a sense joined the liberal project, and did not continue to realize that we have to be concerned about the devil, the flesh, and the world. The world is not our friend. And I think that when you grow up, when you were born in the early 60s in the United States, everything was great. You think that the world is your friend. And when I think of the neighborhood I grew up in, the Catholic Church was huge. I think there were 7 or 8 masses every Sunday at the Catholic Church in my neighborhood in New York. And every single mass was so full that people were coming out the doors. I don't think that happens anymore. I think that, obviously things have changed. But when you grow up in that milieu, you say to yourself, do we have enemies? Who is the enemy? We're fully integrated. We're part of this American project. We're part of the United States. We're Catholics. We fought in the wars and so on and so forth. And the American liberalism will pat you on the head and say, good boy, if you sort of stay in line, and you're happy to enjoy the benefits. And I think that the Catholic Church fell into that. But I think what we really need to get back is is to not think that the world is our friend. The world is not our friend, and we have to be ready to oppose it. And I think that I will even look at my own family back in the United States, people who are very comfortable in their lives. They have no big worries of any kind, and they're Catholic and they go to mass. And if I try to speak to them about something, they say, "What are you talking about? Everything is fine. We have no enemies. There's nothing to be concerned about. Everything is under control." And I'm like, who am I speaking to? This is nuts. But you get sucked into this.
It is a lot. There's something, somehow the economy is held together by some magic Scotch tape that you can look out your window and kid yourself that things are normal, despite a lot of evidence that's out there. But yeah, we have those talks. My wife grew up Italian in Long Island, and same way. Like you went out on your bike and you got it. There were no phones, and everybody knew everybody. It was a nice time to be raised. But I think if I can pull something together where we have to identify it, and this is why I became Catholic, because I realized the war on reality is front and center, a war upon Christ's church, a war upon the mystical body of Christ. And as this ape of the church, this egregore, this mind virus replaces it, we really could take heed to the words of Bishop Sheen, that it's going to look and sound, at least for a while, like Catholicism. But I really think where we really see the emptiness, and Will mentioned the word essence before, morally right now, I'm going to take another whack at the influencers out there. If you cannot see right or wrong, or you've profited, you've become, you know when to say yes and when to say no to the system, that it's become morally bankrupt inside the church. The voices of the church, even if it's EWTN, if they can't point a finger and say, this is wrong, this is not Catholic, because this is bigger. We are preserving the mystical body of Christ. That's what we do. And we have to get the doctrine right, and we have to understand morally, it's easy to go with the flow and surf with that when it's easy flowing. But when you pick up your cross and follow Christ, and he came to divide, that you have to realize that some of these decisions are tricky. And I'll give a hats off right now to a big voice out there, which is Michael Matt, and just somebody with a large platform that really is trying to be truthful and identify what's going on. And we have to identify those voices and stay away from the celebrity culture that's even intruding into, parts of, it's an influencer culture. I get that there's going to be some crossover, but that's a point of discernment that I would see, is that when this is going on right now, this is a time to be at war and preserve what's still true and beautiful within the church, and identify the points that we can preserve within the mystical body. And right now, we need to kind of tune into a sense of moral clarity about what is right and what is wrong. That's my little bandstand. And I don't think I'm going to do much more of that today. So I'm going to turn it over. And I think we should start pulling some of this stuff together. And is there a couple videos or two that you have that you'd like to pull out right now, David?
I do.
Can I just jump in real fast, David, and say I need to leave. So it was really nice talking to you today.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I look forward to listening to the rest of it after it gets.
All right. Well, thanks for Will for coming on, but also especially thank you to you for your help with the technical side of things, which I'm not very particularly skilled, or at least not experienced. And you and I have gone back and forth quite a bit in the last 48 hours or so with a lot of different things. And I'm happy we've had this chance to have these exchanges. I really appreciate your help with the technical side of things, putting together the introduction and so on. And I wish you all the best. Also, I very much enjoyed the Tim Kelly podcast, which you forwarded to me. Really great stuff. I'm always happy to have a chat with you, and I hope we'll be able to talk again soon, of course.
Yeah, I look forward to our next conversation. So God bless you guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Too.
All right. Well, see ya.
Okay. So you still there?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. With regard to sort of a follow up things, I and a couple of videos that I have in the queue here. I'll talk a little bit more about this physical genocide and the assault on the French population, and particularly with regard to abortion. And I don't know, again, I just have to forgive me. I don't know what you know or don't know about certain things that might be going on here. The French government, right after our previous conversation, I think it was in February, decided to enshrine the right of abortion in the French Constitution. And this was a direct response to the American Supreme Court removing the constitutional right to abortion. And the French government, the French establishment, the French elites went bananas when this American Supreme Court decision came down. And for the French elites, abortion is a kind of sacrament. It is something that they see as something almost holy. I can't even go there, but they are hell-bent, and I guess I mean that literally, on the extension of abortion in French society. And so I think it was at the end of February that the French government decided to add the right of abortion to the French Constitution, as the American equivalent would be putting it in the Bill of Rights. If you want to sort of put that into an American context, what does that mean? And and when it happened, the scenes taking place in the French Parliament and in the streets in France were sort of mind-blowing. And I just have two very brief video clips which show, the first one is they actually put up huge screens on the major squares of Paris where people could go to watch the vote taking place to put the right of abortion into the French Constitution. And so the first video is going to be just the scene of the crowds erupting in joy when that took place. And that's what I would like to show now. It is sort of hard to believe. Wait, hold on. Here we are. Okay. Hold on, I have to put the sound on. Let me go back.
We can kill babies, woo!
Yeah, we can kill babies. Let's celebrate. Ecstatic.
This reminds me of this happened in New York City. I guess it's 5-10 years ago, and they saw the lights on Empire State. It up. Yeah, it starts to make sense that maybe God would send in some nasty.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, God would not be just if he didn't do that. It's
I think genocide of the genocide of the unborn. If that's not going to come full circle to the rest of the population that consents to it.
Of course, and it's a terrible thing. You mentioned the word chastisement before, and I think that A, we are living in a chastisement, but B, I think the chastisement might very well get worse. I mean, there might not be a limit to what the kind of chastisement what we might be subjected to. Let me do one more.
David, let me tell you something really quick. In America, when that was shot, I'll say this really quick. When that was at first it was passed the 9-month deal in New York, and then it got followed by a couple of the blue states. The same pressure groups and the same funding behind it immediately started lobbying to give the woman the right to terminate 6 months or a year after the baby came into existence.
Oh my goodness.
And I used to say this to my students just 4 or 5 years ago, and they'd all be shocked. And whatever they're consuming on the media, they're not shocked anymore. It's complete 100% zombie. They're like in these people's zombie film. But and I'll say this really quick. I think nobody's going to like this. Catholics tend to get, because they believe in the system, corralled into, they like this easy morality when they can sell their viewers on the pro-life and where did we come and Roe versus bad. The reality is we're killing more babies than ever before. And the market likes this. And what market am I talking about? There's more long-term abortions. That's where the money's at for the organs on the international market. And so there's a heyday for that. So there's a bit of a delusion thinking there was some kind of victory in America when it got turned back to the States. And I know that's hard for some people to hear. But I'd invite people to kind of, as well as the lives of the unborn, to look around the world and our policies and see who else, what other innocent lives we're killing. But go ahead, David. I'll be ready to put it on stage here.
Okay. So again, the next is the actual vote. It's not a long thing, not a long vote. It's just the announcement of the final vote, the final tally, and then of course all of the French politicians erupting in joy and celebration at the ability. Again, abortion has been legal in France for many years, but this is the American equivalent would be putting the right to an abortion into the Bill of Rights. So it's now part of the French Constitution, and virtually impossible. I shouldn't say impossible to change, but obviously it's very hard to change something that's already in the Constitution.
David, or you can cue it up, but here's a question I want to ask. In America, at least for some, there's this idea that America was founded on some precept of natural law, which again, that's what the pro-life people had to lean on.
Yeah.
When the movement you're talking about, putting it into the equivalent of a Bill of Rights, would the average, and again, this is a generalized question, would the average French mind see this as being connected with a natural law, or is that idea, are we just talking about, we're talking about rights, it's just like a human right, it's a construct?
Well, yes. Again, you're bringing up a very good point.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Yeah,
it's a hard one, and which we could spend quite a bit of time talking about. But let me very quickly draw a contrast between the United States and France, and it might interest you and your viewers. First of all, the United States is based on English culture and English law and even English philosophical concepts. And funnily enough, France is different. And this is even, it might sound very surprising based on the entire show that we've been doing today. The traces of Catholicism in France are still very strong. And so therefore, things like this, things like abortion, are thought about and approached differently. If I have a list of a number of topics to talk about here, which we probably
we better get to it.
We won't get to. But for example, two things which the current government is trying to pass laws in favor of. One of them is euthanasia. The other is surrogacy, surrogate parenting. And I think most Americans and even non-French people might be surprised to understand that these things are illegal in France. You can't do euthanasia is still considered murder. Surrogacy is illegal and people are prosecuted for it. And now, of course, the people who run France, it drives them out of their minds that, but the French people still have a natural resistance to these concepts, whereas America, it's more utilitarian, it's more economic. Whereas the French, God bless them in a sense, no matter what they might think of other things, they still have a kind of Catholic sense of life and death. And So therefore, the government is having a tough. Again, I think they will do it eventually. It will happen, but they're having a tough time selling surrogacy because a lot of people in France are saying this is the buying and selling of people. It's the buying and selling of children. It's manufacturing children as if they were products to be consumed. And many French people, left and right, don't like it. And the same thing for euthanasia. In France, you still have, despite everything, you still have a sense that life is valuable, that old people are good, that we should not hasten death. We should that life is sacred, even if the people are not Christian or not Catholic. One thing I tell, because again, I'm a professor here in France, in Lyon, and I have many foreign students. I teach a lot of classes with students from North America and other parts of the world. And when we talk about these issues in class, I very frequently have to say to the visiting students, no matter what you think or see in front of you, France is a profoundly Catholic country with a Catholic morality. Again, there are immense forces and powerful forces that work against that, but there is a core, there is a nut, a hard core of Catholic, how can I put it, culture.
Yeah.
In this country, which again, the war being waged against it is efficient. It is working. It is making great strides. But there are some things that the French people, they still have trouble with, which Americans might not have trouble with. And so one of these things is surrogacy. The other thing is euthanasia. And then, of course, there's abortion. Now, again, you have many people in France who are against abortion, but the young people, the politicians, the media, it's not anything you can even bring up in polite conversation. You have to be for it, and if you're not, you're beyond the pale, and so on. Nevertheless, there is a strong pro-life movement in France. You have a March for Life among practicing Catholics. I mean, especially traditionalist Catholics. I mean, the position is clear. So I'm just getting back to what you said before about views about the American view of abortion, so to speak. But France is different in that regard. Now, again, going against what I just said, I'm going to show this video now of the French Parliament, and it was a joint session, what we would call in the United States a joint session of Congress with the Parliament and the Senate. France has a Senate, and this is the announcement of the results. So here we go. I'll have to remember to put the sound on. So here we go. Let me just do that.
Le projet de loi constitutionnel, soit les 3/5 des suffrages exprimés, 512. Pour l'adoption, 780. Contre, 72.
So this is the French Republic, the product of the French Revolution.
Voici le résultat.
I'm sorry. Okay, that's that. So there you go.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, you have this this mania for abortion. I just have a couple of numbers here, or facts to share. In 2023, France's population growth turned negative. In other words, there were, for the first time in history, there were more deaths in France than births.
Including immigration?
Yes, including immigration.
Wow, with all those people coming in on
That's
the boat.
right. That's right. And so there. So
that's the suicide. That's the suicide.
Well, that's the suicide. And furthermore, in 2022, I just have it, France had the largest number of abortions in all of its history. So abortions are not stopping or slowing down. It is actually growing. And so this is just a terrible, terrible thing. And the French are pursuing these policies, and they're going along with it. So there you go.
Genocide.
It is a genocide.
Auto-destruction. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
And that people are cheering on their own genocide of their own future. I mean, that, one of the things we talked about last time, Dave, reality, because Christ is reality, Christ is truth, but it's historical, it's hierarchical, and it's sacramental. And so it promotes life and the future. So that's death to all those strange, the hierarchy of the past, of the heavens and the earth, the historical connection to life, family, culture, and the sacramentality in its fullest sense, that we are a sacrament, we're a living sacrament to our Creator. And all of those things are being destroyed. And yeah, there will be a chastisement for these things. It's unfortunate.
One other point, again, I think we're probably approaching the end of the show, but just a couple of other points which I would like to bring up. They're not too, I don't think they'll take too much time, but I wanted to deal with the Islamization of French society, which is another thing which is taking place. And again, I think that this is something which has begun in the United States, but certainly is not as far advanced as it is in France. Again, those who are organizing this invasion, who are organizing this population replacement, are very much aware that when 100 years ago, France was basically 100% Catholic, and but when you change the percentages of the population, the influence of what we might call the dominant religion are going to be reduced. And so you have an increasing percentage of the French population which is Muslim, and that creates changes in the culture. And because of Christian charity, it makes Christians make concessions. But then you wake up one day and you say, wait a minute, France is no longer a Christian country. The Christianity is just one of a wide range of religious options. And then again, what is France? France was the eldest daughter of the church. It was a Catholic superpower. And now it's not. And of course, we know why that is the case, because the population has been changed. And just in this past few months, there have been a number of things that have appeared on the horizon. One of them is the month of Ramadan, which the Muslim month of fasting. And what you have when Muslims integrate a new country or a new culture is they make demands and they put pressure on the non-Muslims to adhere to Muslim practices. And so during Ramadan this year, you had numerous efforts on the part of Muslims to force non-Muslims to conform and actually to practice Ramadan. This was happening in French workplaces, happening in French schools, because you have, school lunches in French schools and things like that. And you had Muslim students pressuring and sometimes physically attacking non-Muslim students for having lunch and or for eating or for having a cup of coffee or something. And you had it in French offices, again, of big companies. And again, it starts off low and slow, but the pressure builds. And so you've had this extension, again, what we would call an Islamization of French society. And again, Christian charity is like, well, I guess, okay, if you're fasting, that's good. And well, yeah, okay, I'll skip lunch today so that you won't be offended by me having lunch and so on. But at the end of the day, you have a large percentage of non-Muslims who are fasting for Ramadan. And it's it is a creeping Islamization of French society. And it doesn't even stop with Ramadan. I have a few other examples. One is the adoption of Muslim dress in workplaces and in schools, the wearing of hijabs by young women. And you have a lot of French women who will start wearing Muslim dress so that they will not be harassed by Muslim men in the streets. And so you have French people, I would even say Christians, who are adopting Muslim dress in the workplace, in schools, in the streets, just to, the word would be, to have peace, just to have peace in society. But again, at the end of the day, when this process is over, there is no more Christianity. Everyone becomes a Muslim. Everyone acts like a Muslim. And then finally, at the end of the day, people just convert, and they convert to Islam. And that's how the society becomes transformed. One final point about this, which is also in French sports. You have a lot of Muslim players on soccer teams and so on. And they are pressuring non-Muslim players on sports teams to fast during Ramadan, to change the schedules of sports events to coincide with Ramadan, so that games will be played after the fast. And also with regard to clothing, men in Islam are not allowed to expose their skin between their belly buttons and their knees. And so therefore, the actual uniforms of French sports teams are being changed to reflect that. And so again, we have this creeping Islamization, and people are going along with it. Some of them out of fear, others because, well, I'm going to go along to get along. But the end result, the final result, is the Islamization of French society. And it is something that is happening rapidly. It is happening in front of our eyes. And in a certain measurable amount of time, we would say that France simply really is no longer a Christian country, or that Islam is perhaps the dominant religion in France. And it's terrible. I mean, I again, seeing this happen to a country that I love, a country which to me is still, as I was saying before, is still very Catholic. It still has a lot of Catholic culture in it, but that culture is being attacked, and it's being torn down and replaced. And that brings me all the way back to the beginning of this show, with the videos that we were watching, the video clips about the broom of Israel and about the Islamization of French society. So anyway, I just wanted to mention those points. But my last point, perhaps, because I don't want to end on a negative note. As you know, this Sunday is Pentecost. And every year now for well over 20, probably going on 30 years now. Nope, I'm going to correct myself, more like 40 years. We have had the pilgrimage of Pentecost to the Chartres Cathedral. It's called Notre Dame de Chrétienté, which in English is Our Lady of Christendom. And you mentioned Michael Matt before, and I know that Michael Matt participates in this pilgrimage, as he's been doing for many years. There's a large American contingent that participates in this pilgrimage. And so that pilgrimage will be starting this Saturday. And they have broken all records with regard to the signups, to the number of people participating in this pilgrimage. This is a pilgrimage of traditional Catholicism. And it is the largest pilgrimage that takes place in Europe. It lasts 3 days. It starts in Paris, and the pilgrims walk from Paris to the Chartres Cathedral. And that is crowned with a traditional Latin Mass in the Chartres Cathedral. And it is, and there's so many people have signed up that they had to close the registrations a long time ago. Furthermore, this has become a youth event. I think I heard that the average age of people participating in this is 20 years of age. And so it is very, very heartening to see the phenomenal growth of this pilgrimage, the phenomenal growth of traditional Catholicism in France, something that cannot be stamped out, something that is growing, and it is growing so fast that it is that the hierarchy, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in France has informed the Vatican that they will not stamp it out, that it cannot be stamped out, and that to do so would create so much violence in the French Catholic Church that they want no part of it. And then finally, maybe, I don't know, this is really my last point, but getting back to the Islamization of France, this past Easter was the largest number of catechumens who were baptized into the Catholic Church in France since the Second World War. And a large number of those catechumens who entered the church were in fact Muslims.
Wow, that's
yes,
good news.
It is good news. And even in my church, in my parish, traditional Latin Mass parish here in Lyon, again, if I say a large number, a good number, a significant number of young Muslim people have chosen the Catholic faith and entered the Catholic Church and were baptized. And I see them every Sunday at Mass, and I say to myself that the devil will not have the last word, that God has another plan, and that the Blessed Virgin Mary is leading her Muslim children into the Catholic Church. These are, again, the numbers are not enormous, but these are very, very fervent people, and these are people who have taken great risks. They're young people. I know some of them. They're 18, 19, 20, 24 years old, who are at great risk for what they did. They've lost family. They have lost friends. They have really paid. Again, the French can complain about various things that we, in a certain sense, maybe we have to put up with. But these young Muslim converts are risking big time. They are risking, in some instances, their lives for having left Islam, the penalty for which is death. And yet they have entered the church. They have been baptized. They have been, they're going to be confirmed within the next few days and a couple of weeks, I think. And I see the joy in their faces. I see the fervor that they have, and they are brave, and they are really happy to have joined the Catholic Church. So maybe that's the word I will end on, the mention of the Chartres pilgrimage, and the mention of the, again, not enormous, but substantial and significant numbers of Muslim converts who have actually heard the gospel and decided to follow Christ.
That's beautiful. And yeah, Gerard would say this, it's never just one thing. When there's this thing happening, there's the reaction. And even like down in Brazil, they're getting more of the Mormon and Jehovah's Witness and whatnot come down there, and it strengthens the actual core of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. But when we think of Scripture, especially in times like this, as the apocalypse foretells, that Christ says his position of what we should be right now is don't be lukewarm. If you're neither hot nor cold, or if you're neither, he'll spit you out. It's time to get intense and have a warrior's mentality about your personal holiness, about what the church teachings are. And this gets confusing at the time we look at Pope Francis. He's encouraging the immigration. He's encouraging ecumenical dialogue that always goes one way. And so, but yet the light is on with the church and with the traditional mats, even as it's because it's being attacked, that it's going to attract the kind of person that desires the light of Christ. And so we have those things to kind of draw our attention toward, to get intense about and be part of that holy remnant. And that was, even if it's just some numbers, that's really cool. And that's a really positive note. The last thing I would say is, Kabbalah and this mass chemical project of bringing East and West into conflict to create a new Noahide solution is hard for people to get their heads around. But the powers that be want you to hate the Mohammedans. We don't hate Mohammedans. We don't hate Jews. We're Christians. We're filled with love, but we will defend Holy Mother Church and the mystical body of Christ.
That's right.
But we do so in light of the tradition of the church. And so there's a lot of room for hope. But in terms of our own personal salvation, it's time to get in the game and to let our light shine for Christ. So, David, it's been fantastic having you on the show.
Great. It was nice to be back.
I'd like to, can we play the Bambi Thug video one more time? No, I'm just kidding.
That's fun. Well, if anyone who's watching this can go back to the beginning and start again and watch Bambi Thug. It's what an incredible scene. Very, very sad, but again, very active and strong church in France. There are a lot of very, very devout, militant people. Always remember, we are the church militant, and we are called to militancy. Maybe just forgive me for jumping back with one more thing. In our previous discussion, I talked about the French Revolution, and I don't know if I really developed this too much, but a lot of my research on the French Revolution and why Catholics were so persecuted and shed so much blood, and why they were not able to fight against the revolution is that before the French Revolution, nobody saw it coming. And the French Catholic Church was very comfortable. These people were very comfortable. They never thought that they would ever see such a thing as the French Revolution. They could never have imagined that the French priests and nuns would have their heads chopped off under the guillotine, that the king would be guillotined. These things were completely unimaginable. And so they were caught with their guard down. They weren't ready. And so when the storm came, they were overcome by the storm. I think that now, with history, with knowledge, with the amount of information that we have, with the freedom to share information and knowledge, I don't know what the future holds, but it is imperative that we do not let the same thing happen to us, that we understand what we are dealing with, who we are dealing with, what our weapons are to defend ourselves, and to actually turn the battle around. And as our Lord said, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. But that image means that we are storming the gates of hell. We are not running away. We, in fact, should be on the offensive. We should be the ones who are storming the gates of hell, and those gates will not last. They will not prevail. We will win this battle. We will win. And with Christ as our leader, we will win. And he has given us that promise. And so we have to be alert. We have to be smart. We have to be on our guard. We have to be militant. But of course, with charity ruling over all, charity being the most important of virtues, we must be charitable to all, especially to our enemies, as Christ said. But we are militant. We are the church militant. We have to fight. We have to be clear-eyed. We have to know what we are doing, why we are doing it, and in the end, victory will be ours.
I'm going to leave it at that. That's a nice place to leave it, David.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely.
And again, thanks to you, Doug, and to Will for all the work that you do. I watch all of the shows. All of the guests are really great. Especially recently with our friends in Tampa with the very, very beautiful beautiful insights and beautiful discussion. So again, thanks to you for everything as well.
Thank you, David. So everybody that's joined us today for Dr. Deep State, thank you so much for following us. We really do appreciate that. We're putting together a locals page because we want to develop more of a sense of community and more of a sense that we can all become more involved together here. So I'm going to sign off, and it's been great having you, David.
Thank you. Goodbye.